Morning, Dayan Pfeffer.
Morning, David.
How are you?
Thank God, given the circumstances, very well, and great to be here.
Again?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was. We had a good chat the last time. Today, I thought, well, Chanukah is soon coming.
Round the corner.
Round the corner. This Thursday night. Gosh, I've got to check in there with the Rabbi. And I just thought, Chanukah. It is just one of the most popular festivals of our people. And yet, when you start to dig beneath the surface, as I did when I got into this religious business, you realise there's not that much literature about it from the old-time sources. Of course, it's not in the Bible, it's not in Tanakh, because it happened after that period of time. So I just thought, let's open it up a bit and let's get a historical perspective, maybe a perspective on the customs and whatever else comes up. But before we start that, I want to ask you, where does Chanukah for you rank in terms of all the festivals, in terms of favourites? Is it up, down? Where do you put it for yourself?
Chanukah is absolutely the favourite, no question. Takes the biscuit. Again, if you're speaking about rankings, then of course Chanukah is a rabbinic festival. It's not up there with the Torah festivals. But in terms of the identification, in terms of, what makes you excited, they all makes you excited. But Chanukah has a very, very special feeling. And by the way, part of that special feeling of Chanukah is that there's nothing biblical. It's the only festival. Meaning even Purim has its Megillat Esther. But Chanukah doesn't even have that. It's our festival. And the Talmud says that a person loves what he himself creates more than anything that he gets from someone else. So we got Pesach from Hashem, Yetziat Mitzrayim, we got Shavuos, we got Sukkos, and even Megillat Esther, there's something there that was given to us, but Chanukah is all ours. It's as it were self-made. And I think that's something about the special flavor, the special love that we have. That don't forget the Rambam himself says mitzvah ner Chanukah, mitzvahs ner Chanukah 𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵, meaning it's especially beloved, it's especially close. We love it, as it were, more than anything else. So it's not just my personal taste. And I think a part of that is because it's really ours. It's a festival of our own doing. And by the way, many of the customs are also developments over time. It's something which is very much a kind of organic, exactly, an organic development over time that represents Jewish tradition. And I think maybe, we could obviously unpack this later, but the fact that it's become so popular and so universal, both for Jews and even for non-Jews who are, busy talking about Hanukkah and celebrating it, I think that's also meaningful.
That's very interesting. On the history side, just breaking it down to where it all began, the Chanukah story. So just give us a brief background on that. Like, what is Chanukah?
Right. So, you can look up the story, find it online, and get a whole different range of representations of the wars of the Maccabees against the Syrian Greeks and so on. And of course, that was the historical setting. But I think that if you want to ask, where did it start? It started in what Chazal call darkness. Chazal say that Yavan, of the different exiles that we went through, so one of them is represented by the word choshech. Right? Choshech, Chazal say, zu Yavan, 𝗔𝗯𝗆 shel Israel. They darkened the eyes of the Jewish people.
These are what we call the Greeks, the Avanim.
Yeah, exactly what we call the Greeks. They weren't exactly the classic Greeks. Doesn't really make a difference right now who they were. But the idea is this concept of darkness, I think, is very, very fundamental to the history, to where this came from. Because, we came out from Egypt, it was light. God revealed himself at our coming out of Egypt, at Har Sinai, in the wilderness, with the miracles that we had, with the manna and with everything else that we had, with the well and so on and so forth, and our miraculous conquest of Eretz Israel, of the Holy Land, Eretz Canaan, and so on and so forth. Meaning, as it were, Judaism, in its inception, was a religion of light. a religion of God bringing himself, revealing himself to the world through the Jewish people.
Supernatural.
Very much so. Meaning, you ask, how do we have the Torah? The answer is, God gave it to us in a moment of real revelation. So there's light.
Which is not something you see every day of the week.
It really isn't. And where it began to be this situation, this condition of not seeing every day of the week, meaning not having prophecy, not having your Beit HaMikdash miracles, you know, your everyday supernatural existence together with God, whether it's through prophets or through the priests and so on and so forth. That really happened, or that's represented by the kind of Greek period, by this period that began to end prophecy, began to end the kind of revelation of God in a direct way to the world through the Jewish people. And then we were plunged into this new era, an era of darkness, an era of non-revelation, that you don't see God. You walk around the world and you say, 1 second, but where's God? Where is he in this picture? Everything seems to be working, everything's functioning, but everything's functioning without God. And where's he in the picture? And Chanukah, in a historical sense and also in the essential sense, tries to give an answer to that absence, to that vacuum, to that darkness. And the answer to that, in the Jewish sense, is Chanukah. And that's what the festival is all about. It's a festival of light. But it's a festival of our light. We're the ones that are doing the lighting. As opposed to Pesach, we don't need to light any candles. God appears and then he does all the shining for us. But here we've got to light our own candles. And that's our answer to this new global, universal condition of darkness. Our answer is to light up our own Chanukah lights.
To do it from within and then to bring it out into the world.
Absolutely. That's why the idea of the Pirsum Hanes, this publicizing of the miracle, is so central. It's central to Chanukah in the basic sense that we light our candles at the doorstep, at the windows, wherever we can, that they should shine up into the public domain, into the public space, and light up the world, you know, to bring...
Let people see.
Let people see, exactly. Let people see what it's all about. And it's also central, like you started off, in the very definition of the festival that doesn't have a scriptural basis. It's barely in the Mishnah. Even in the Mishnah, which is the beginning of 𝗄cie𝗿𝗵 that was written down, Chanukah, there's like a couple of allusions, but it's not really there. It's really tradition. It's about us having this tradition and being able to express it through our own actions as an organic, unfolding, developing tradition.
I know you like to, having listened to you many times, you like the topic of responsibility. This shouts responsibility because it's all coming, like we've just said, from us. And when you don't take responsibility, nothing happens. But when you do, you have Chanukah.
Amazing. You said it just on the mark, and it's about responsibility. But this is the amazing thing. It's not just responsibility for ourselves, because you can teach that to anyone, and that's something which is the staple of human functioning, is to be able to take responsibility for yourself, to get up in the morning, to provide for yourself, for your family. But here, the responsibility is for God. We're taking responsibility for him. And that's the amazing thing about Chanukah. His appearance in the world, his presence is contingent on us. Right? The Chazal say it in a quite remarkable way. They say, 𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵 Hashem, the Pasuk says, and Chazal darshan, they give a hermeneutical interpretation, 𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵. Ilmim means dumb, meaning unable to speak. As it were, God is unable to speak. He's decreed upon himself a state of dumbness, of not being able to speak, and we have to do the talking for him. It's our responsibility for him to bring his own words, to bring his presence, to bring his goodness into the world. And that is what Chanukah is all about.
Wow, that really puts us in the driving seat to do something with this world. Because if we just sit back and expect everything to happen, which is, unfortunately, you see that in the world. Some people do that. Just wait, let someone else do it. But no, this is the greatest Jewish, in a way, it's the greatest Jewish act. Because we're saying it's for God, but for the benefit of the Jews and everyone. Hence the publicizing, But we must say that when it's dangerous, we don't publicize. What's that all about? Like there was a time where we couldn't and we shouldn't have lit. So where does that balance come? Because I just thought of that as you were saying it.
Well, that's absolutely true. Meaning it's our basic calling. It's our basic calling, but we have to remember that calling takes place within a context, and that context is the world in which we live. We're not fundamentalist in that sense that we're going to do this calling, come what may.
Right.
Doesn't make a difference, and this is something that we've also learned over the generations. In the beginning, and this is part of the Chanukah story. Would you believe? Although it dates back a bit before then. The question of whether you are allowed to fight a war on Shabbat. So initially, these halachot were not yet clarified, and therefore on Shabbos, people used to just literally rest and not take up their arms, and they used to obviously get slaughtered on Shabbos by their enemies, until they clarified the halacha that no, you're allowed to fight a war on Shabbos because our Torah is a Torah of living by the Torah. And living by the Torah means that you have to put the Torah into the context of our world. And the same thing is true about the Chanukah festival. When it's dangerous to publicize, then the publicity isn't going to do any good. It's not going to actually fulfill its calling.
Or do the reverse.
It'll do the reverse. The whole Chanukah festival, don't forget, it's a festival, meaning it recalls our basic calling of publicizing, but it's also our expression of we rejoice in that calling. Think about Hallel. Every day of Chanukah, we say Hallel.
The full Hallel.
The real thing. Now, Pesach, this wonderful revelation, God's greatest revelation on the Jewish people, taking us out of Israel, out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, our national birth, and the revelation of God's name together with that birth, we have one day of Hallel. All the other days of Pesach it's a custom. It's a customary Hallel, but it's not a full obligation of Hallel.
Because we want to feel some joy connected to that, but in Chanukah, it's the full-on, go for it.
Chanukah is 8 days of full Hallel. It's the only, it's an amazing expression of the fullness of the rejoicing in this calling and in this understanding that this is the way that Judaism is able to go forward, is able to not just to survive, but also to fulfill its most basic mission. And that's the amazing thing, that despite the darkness, or even because of the darkness, we're able to provide, or we're able to find this incredible fulfillment of light, even though we're in a condition of absence, in a condition of darkness.
This idea of the Jewish basic mission, now, it may seem obvious. I think it's obvious to me and you as we're talking, but for those people that may say, well, what is the Jewish mission? We're small people. We're constantly being harassed, as that's our history. So what is our mission, and how does Chanukah represent that?
Well, no question. I mean, our mission, in a nutshell, is to bring God and godliness into the world, to be his ambassadors. We're like the embassy of God in the world, and that's our mission, to bring him in. And there are weird and wonderful ways in which that happens, and that's really a very basic part of life and understanding of how things work. Meaning you've got a mission, you've got a calling. You sometimes think, oh, I know exactly how I'm going to do this. I'm going to find my self-fulfillment. I'm going to find my realization in a way of X, Y, and Z. And then you start going on that path, and all of a sudden you're diverted onto all kinds of different paths. But ultimately, those paths, it works out in retrospect that was the greatest realization of your original mission. So I would not, planning in advance, I would not have thought that our mission, for example, of bringing godliness into the world would have been fulfilled, for instance, through the track of Christianity.
Right.
And the Rambam says that it was, meaning, it's true that we didn't envisage this at the outset, and it's been a rocky journey. But nonetheless, the idea of the one God and the idea of his goodness and a lot of the values, what many people would call nowadays Judeo-Christian values. But a lot of those values are Torah true values, and they've been transmitted through a path that we wouldn't have necessarily envisaged or thought of, but that's how it's worked out. And the Jewish people have remained a small minority, but even though they've remained a small minority, what they've brought into the world, and again through a multitude of unexpected tracks, has been unparalleled.
Would you include Islam in that as well?
Oh, certainly. I mean, without a doubt, Islam is a religion that's based to a very large degree on Jewish texts as well as Jewish ideas, and it's gone its own way, of course, and we've got a lot of differences, and it's important to underscore them. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, the belief in the one God and in His goodness is a foundation of all three, monotheistic religions, and we've been there. But that doesn't mean our job is finished, and that's important to remember. We've still got our job, we've still got our journey
as the ambassadors,
of course, as the ambassadors, and we've got a special condition today. We've got special circumstances that we've got state. We've got, the return to political power, which is obviously a big challenge on the one hand, but it's a tremendous, tremendous opportunity in the other to continue that mission and to raise it a notch, to go another mile.
So even though Christianity and Islam historically have had a proper beef with us, whilst we've influenced the world to bring out the idea of godliness and stuff, and we may disagree, and we do disagree with some of the ways that they approach it, nonetheless, you're still saying that this is the path in which Hashem is being revealed into the world, and we have to go along with the flow.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the halachot, the halachos of Chanukah, is that the Gemara says, and it's brought in the Mishnah, in the Shulchan Aruch, that there's a mitzvah, there's a special quality to light the candles beneath 10 tefachim. Mm-hmm. Meaning, you're lighting, let's say, wherever you're lighting, outside your door, and you're putting your candles on a stool. So that stool should be higher than 3 tefachim. It shouldn't be on the ground, but it should be beneath 10 tefachim.
How high is that in our modern day terms, you think, approximately?
10 tefachim is about, it's about
2.5 feet? A bit more?
Yeah. A bit,
basically, a tefach is like that, basically, right?
Well, it gets into
measurements.
I don't want to get into all the machlokesim about the different measurements, but if we're talking about 30, 40 centimeters, we're good. And then the question is, what does this 10 tefachim represent?
Right.
What is that amount? Why? So the Gemara elsewhere in Maseches Sukkah, the Gemara tells us that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, never goes below 10 tefachim of the world. And the Gemara asks a whole range of questions. Surely Moshe Rabbeinu, he ascended Mount Sinai, and didn't the Shekhinah descend onto him? And then the Gemara brings a whole range of questions and answers, and doesn't budge an inch from those 10 tefachim. And that's very meaningful. It means that, that there's a sphere of where God is. We don't understand everything that God does. That's above 10 tefachim. That remains, as it were, aloof of our understanding, of our comprehension. We're limited to below 10 tefachim. Below 10 tefachim is where we are. Where God is above 10 tefachim. It's like a different dimension. We're limited to our 3 dimensions. And above 10 tefachim is those additional dimensions where God is, where His understanding or His blueprint or His thinking, so to speak,
is above our comprehension.
But the Chanukah lights, so we do that in our world. We bring that light down here, lighting up our world beneath 10 tefachim. Above 10 tefachim, there's a different type of light. That's not a human light. That's the light of God. And that's where these different pathways emerge from, and we can't fathom that. We're not going to be able to plan that out. We're not going to be able to understand exactly why it had to be this way. That's above 10 tefachim. Our job is to light things up where we are, under the 10 tefachim, where we can see things, where we're able to do what we can. But then how things play out, that we're not in control.
Right.
And that's part of the Chanukah idea. We do what we can, and we trust in God to do the rest. I think that's why we have this dual miracle of Chanukah. There's on the one hand the victory in the military sense of the Hashmonaim, the Maccabees, that they were victorious, they vanquished their Greek-Syrian adversaries.
In a physical war.
In a physical, natural war where there were casualties and painful casualties, and this is in Sefer Maccabim, that this is chronicled, that there were painful deaths to the Jewish side. The Maccabees themselves, they lost some of their greatest figures in the family of Judah Maccabee, of Yehuda Maccabee,
right.
and that was difficult, and they fought valiantly, and ultimately they were successful. Ultimately they were victorious, but it was a run of the mill war. It wasn't run of the mill in the sense that it was few against many and the weak against the strong, but it was a war as wars go, and you have casualties. But then on the other side you've got the miracle of the oil. And that was a divine smile. And that was, as it were, you do your part and I'll do my part. And you never know. Meaning you've got to do your part. That's your side of the deal. You see that, things have come to where they are. There's no other way to go forward but to go fight this war, even though the odds are against you. But that's your part. And then God will do his part. And that's this balance. And the same thing I think is true of the, Christianity and Islam side, that, obviously this is not how we planned it. Like many things, I don't think anybody could have envisaged how our current return to our Jewish homeland would have come about. Nobody would have planned that in advance.
No.
But, we do our part and God does his.
A couple of things on that. There are, in how you just described the wars in the Chanukah story, there are very, very distinct echoes of the state of Israel coming into being. In the same way, we were few against the many. We were totally outnumbered. We, if you know the history of the War of Independence, we basically had no weapons. We had hardly anything, but nonetheless. And there were many, many, many casualties, as there have been in all the other wars since, and please God, there won't be any more. But yet we were victorious. And then you see the miracles, if your eyes are open, that is, and if you're not too taken away by, oh no, this is not how the miracle is going to be shown. But we're here, millions of us, and we're making a good go of it. So it's just very interesting how that link of Chanukah is to the Medina.
Well, first of all, absolutely. Meaning, that we're not the first. This is not the first show, and you're not the first host to make this link. It's a link that's been explored and been discussed. But I think that for our purposes, I think that the point you made at the end is probably the most salient, the most important, and that is Chanukah teaches us to have our eyes open to divine providence, to the ways of God, even though we're in the dark, even though God doesn't come out and say, hi there, and give a wave and say, by the way, it's me that's doing all this stuff. We don't see that. We see that it's us doing all of this stuff. But the Chanukah miracle and the continual observance of Chanukah that Chazal instituted, enacted, and we carry on till today is exactly that point, to see the light in the darkness, to see that this light is divine. It's an amazing thing. We don't have an example of this in any other festival that we say, Haneres halalu 𝗄ci𝗿𝗵. This light that we're lighting is sanctified. It's holy. It's a holy light. We're not allowed to derive benefit from Chanukah light. You're not allowed to read by your Chanukah light.
Right.
There's no other light like that. That's not, your Shabbos lights are not like that. And there's virtually, there's nothing else which is quite like this. And the idea is, yes, we're lighting this, but we're lighting candles that are divine in their origin, that the light is coming from up there. Just it's our responsibility, it's our job to be lighting it. And you've got to put on special glasses to see it that way. And you're right, just like Chanukah, 𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵, so too b'zman hazeh, we've got to wear those spectacles, to wear those glasses, and to look at what's going on around us in the light of those Chanukah candles that give the world this special lens through which we can gain perspective.
Why do you think then there seems to be more than just a minority movement within certainly the religious world of this idea of staying as far away from the Christians and the non-Jews as possible? This thing that we seem to have brought with us in the religious culture, that by extension what you're saying, I don't ascribe to this, having grown up with non-Jews and in a non-Jewish school and seeing them as they are, seeing the benefits. But culturally, there's this very powerful fear where it doesn't matter what the Rambam has ever said about this, about how Hashem has played himself out in history to reveal himself through the other billions of people, not millions, billions. He's been publicized more through them than us, even though we were the initiators. But nonetheless, in a planet of billions of people, the influence has been strongly through them. In the end, I imagine it's all going to come together beautifully. But where is this affront?
Well, we have to understand that there's this is a dual movement, and both sides of it have to be taken into account and given their due respect. Because on the one hand, yes, God moves in mysterious ways, and a lot of what we've tried to bring into the world has been advanced and promoted by Christianity and by others. However, given the fact that we were in exile among nations, Christian, Muslim, whoever they were, for so many years, for so many hundreds, thousands of years, then that has a very grave and very inherent danger. And that danger is that you lose your own identity. You forget who you are. You forget what your own mission is, what your special status is. And because of that danger, so the reaction, and I think it was a very justified and very correct reaction, was to take a step back and say, okay, we understand that we've got this greater mission to the world, but in order that mission should not be compromised, in order that our own integrity shouldn't be compromised, then we can't just, mix culturally. I mean, this is what Chazal, this was like the great mission of Chazal, of 𝗄ci𝗿𝗍𝗶 𝗵, in the sense of, for example, all these different prohibitions against stam yenom, wine of non-Jews, and
which seems nowadays very archaic to the simpleton.
Bread of non-Jews and so on. All of this was to make sure that we keep a distance. Don't forget that Chanukah itself, right? Chazal tell us that the Greek Syrians, they tried as best as they could to, as it were, blur the distinction between the Jew and the non-Jew, and to say, well, it's all the same. You guys are the same as us. Let's translate the Torah into Greek also. It's all the same. And Chazal say that was a very, very grave thing. It was a 3 days of darkness, Chazal say, came down into the world because of the translation of the Torah into Greek, as it were, making it just another part of the general canon of thought, of texts, and so on.
You're saying it removed its to a certain extent its uniqueness.
Absolutely. And Chazal, they give an expression of this in the fact that the Greeks didn't destroy the Beis HaMikdash, but they rather defiled it, and they also pierced holes in it, meaning that exactly in the place that used to distinguish between where Jews are allowed to go and where non-Jews are no longer allowed to go, and they pierced holes through that, as it were, to show that there's no distinction. And that's the danger, because when you're in the dark, then everything looks the same. You can't see anything anymore. There's no distinctions. It's all the same. But if we lose that perception of our own calling, of what we're supposed to be bringing into the world. By the way, the time of the Greeks was the first time in history that we find this idea of what Chazal call mityavnim, those who adopted Greek culture and brought it into the Jewish people, as it were, again, blurring the demarcations, saying that, we don't need our own culture. We can adopt the culture of the nations that surround us, and that culture can be, just as good. But again, we're losing our own basic identity, what it means to be Jewish. And our culture is a culture of Torah, a culture of mitzvah, a culture of faith in God, and so on. And other cultures obviously bring in other ideas. So that's the idea of keeping distance. Meaning, and there's a balance between, on the one hand...
It's a fine line. Because we as people, we're modern people. We interact in this modern world. We use computers, smartphones. We're involved in internet stuff. Look at this. Look where we're sitting.
We support Spurs.
We support Spurs, which is a good time at the moment. So I can celebrate that, especially in the time of Chanukah, because the light is being shown to the world. The miracle is being revealed. But we're participating and we are interacting. So I imagine, like myself, there's this ongoing tape running in your head. It'd be like, engage, but remember that you're not the other. You're Jewish.
That your core is based on a different set of, first of all, a different identity, and that identity has within it this whole set of ideas, values, principles, mitzvot, faith, laws, mitzvot, and so on, and that's your core. And of course, like many of Rabbi Seinu have taught us, Rav Shimshon Falhersh comes to mind, that we've got to experience the world in its fullness, and that's part of the goodness of God. If you don't experience the world, if you don't know what's going on, then you don't appreciate the goodness of 𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵. You don't realize his gifts to us, and that's part of living, and it's a good part of living. But at the same time, we have to keep that distinction very much in mind. And again, there's also a distinction between living among the nations and living here in Israel, in the Holy Land, having our own state. It makes a tremendous difference. It's a different internal motion. When you're surrounded by a foreign culture, then the reaction, the natural and the good reaction, is to shy away from that.
Be much more cautious.
Of course.
But here you can be complacent. It's a different...
You can, well, that's the fine line between confidence and complacence. We should be more confident. We should be able to bring more of our light out there. And I think we are in many ways. But you're right, complacency is always just around the corner. And if we're all going to buy in wholesale to Western culture, and Western culture is imbued with a value set.
Right.
And, sometimes it's very subtle, and you don't realize how much that you're being influenced and how much you're absorbing that value set. And again, some of it might be good. Some of it might have come from us,
right.
But it's like you say, these are fine lines.
We're always needing to wear these spectacles. We take spectacles on and off. There's the Chanukah spectacles, and then we put on the other spectacles of the one to remain Jewish in the face of foreign cultures and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's also why the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah is defined by Chazal. This is the if you want, the quintessential definition of the mitzvah of Chanukah is Ner ish u'beisai, a person and his home. It's a home mitzvah, and the mitzvah is to light the candles outside your home, meaning the Jewish home, which is the place that protects, that guards,
that develops and nurtures the
Jewishness,
Jewishness,
that maintains the integrity of the Jewish people. It's about the Jewish home. It's about this, some will say a kind of feminine aspect, right? Nerishu Beisai, the wife, the home, the family. That's where we protect. That's where we maintain our distinctiveness, right? Our most basic, fundamental identity. And it's from there, from the home, that we shine up to the rest of the world. If we're lighting candles in the street, that's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to shine up to the public domain from the Jewish home.
That reminds me of something I just feel like I have to say at this point. When we moved to Ramot and we were doing the shipputzim in 2011, we were doing the renovations in the house. So my wife, we wanted to make a playroom for our kids, and we were discussing, like, how do we wanted to make this special, and we got in a special, like, interior designer specifically for this room. We wanted to really make it for the kids, a place where they would feel happy in their childhood growing up. So we were deliberating about, well, what to put on the cupboards, because this specific interior designer, her skill is that she and her team carve in images to the wood and colour them in a very unique and spectacular way. So there was the obvious thing of well, make it a bright room and a happy room, so sun and moon and stars and all this. And I just thought, wait a minute. I although I'm not an expert in halacha, I do know that we have to be careful with images. So thankfully at that time, Dayan Yehoshua was still alive and with us in Edgware, although we were living here. So fortunate was I that I had a relationship with him. So I called him up. And of course, his answer, as you'd expect, was, and he gave the answer and then he gave his unique slant. And he said, your home must smell and taste Jewish. And he said, it's not just a case of we don't put suns and moons. That's not the point. We don't. But why? He said, decorate it with Jewish symbols and symbolisms. And if you go into our playroom now, there is into the baby's room as well. So she carved in, this Israeli from Tel Aviv, had never done this before. She carved Chanukah, Menorah, Shabbos candles. Nothing, no physical thing, no sun, no moon, nothing. I don't know if we did a dreidel as well. And they loved it. The team in Tel Aviv loved it. They've never done it before. They were busy doing all their other stuff in their hotels that they decorate and we explained to them why. So it was an amazing opportunity.
Amazing.
It was amazing.
Such a good story.
But Dayan Yehoshua, that was him. He said it should smell, he said 𝗵𝗆𝗵𝗆, it should smell, your house should smell Jewish and be proud of it. And it echoes what you just said. That's the home. That's the bias.
The home is the place. The Torah says this. The Torah says, V'shinantam levonecha. Right? We pass things on by tradition from father to son, parents to children. The home is the essential place, the most basic, fundamental place through which our tradition is passed on through the generations. And that's why Chanukah is so connected to the home, because Chanukah is a festival of tradition. That's what it's all about. It's about making sure that we pass on this message, that we pass on this light that's within us. It's not a light that comes in from outside. It's a light that comes out from inside. And to be able to have that light, we've got to pass it on from one generation to the next. And that's why, by the way, the Gemara it's actually not where the main sugya of Chanukah is in Maseches Shabbos. But there's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Yud Ches. The Gemara there speaks about a text called Megillas Ta'anit. The Gemara speaks about whether the ideas that are written in Megillat Ta'anit as obligations, you've got to fast here and to celebrate here, all different types of things, are those still relevant? Are those still applicable, binding, or they're no longer binding? The Gemara wants to bring a proof from Chanukah, which is in there, and the Gemara has a whole discussion which I won't go into at length, but the final line is Chanukah is different because it publicizes the miracle, because it's something public. And I think that the idea there is not just because so what, so if it's no longer applicable, it's no longer binding, so that won't be binding either.
Right.
There's something more about Chanukah. Chanukah is, we have it by tradition. It's not about any text. We have it by tradition because it's become public. It's become a part of our public life. As it were, the whole of Chanukah is about publicizing what we've got. And what we've got, we have by tradition. It's publicizing that tradition, but it's got to start from the home. If you don't have the home, the Jewish home, then you've lost everything. That's why family is so fundamental to what it means to be Jewish. Everyone knows this, right? The Jewish family, the Jewish mother and mother-in-law and all of these things. This is obviously a good source of jokes.
God bless them both.
God bless them. But it's not just about the jokes. It's
right.
actually true. Our family is such an amazing unit. Think about Israel versus the rest of the world in terms of family, in terms of even, birth rates. I don't want to get into, too many statistics here. But versus the OECD, Israel is way up there, top by far. And I'm not talking about the Charedi mothers.
No.
I'm talking about the non-Charedi. Right. Even though completely secular families in Israel, it's perfectly normal to have 3-4 children, which is very unusual.
Without blinking. It's like we're building a family. Blinking. This is what we do.
It's what Jewish people do. And I think that's so ingrained to what it means to Jewish identity, to Jewish culture, because we're passing on that tradition. And even though, some of those traditions have, slightly become a bit jarred, how they're passing on, like you said, from Tel Aviv, and thank God that they found David Goodwin and managed to,
find Rochelle, and
to see this light. But still, those family values are still there, and that transition is still there, just waiting to be restarted. By the way, Chanukah is about restarting. Right, Chanukah Sameach. Chanukah is called Chanukah because of starting anew. Right, it's a consecration, but it's not building from nothing, not from scratch. Right, the temple, the Mikdash, wasn't destroyed. We didn't have to rebuild it. It was there. There was a structure in place, but it needed it needed to be restarted. Right, it had to be, as it were, rehabilitated. Right, from anew, but not something from nothing. It was there, and that's what we are also. 𝗵𝗆 Israel is there, the family's there. We're here. We just need this
refresh,
rekindling.
What's that? What other things do we see in that word Chanukah? What other breakdowns do we see?
Well, again, so without a doubt, the word Chanukah is from Chanukah Sameach. It's the meaning, and the basic meaning is to
not to inaugurate.
It's a re-inauguration. Right, reconsecration. Re-inauguration. The temple was defiled, and it was re-inaugurated, reconsecrated.
We go again.
Exactly. It's a new beginning, but not yesh me'ayin, not something from scratch. Right. That's the basic meaning. However, of course, Rabbi Seinu over the generations have found many, many different meanings. One of them is 𝗵𝗆. Chanukah is on the 25th of Kislev, so that's 𝗵𝗆, 25, and the word Chanu means they encamped. And as it were, we're now, in exile, we're in darkness. Again, they were in a kind of exile, they were within the land of Israel, but under a foreign power, threatened by the Greek Empire, the Greek Seleucids, a type of Syrian Greeks, and in a state of exile. And they found an encampment. An encampment means you don't have an empire. You don't even have a solid
sovereignty.
State. You don't have a good sovereignty. But you manage to find yourself an encampment, meaning the being able to find some kind of a foothold, right? Even though you're in a precarious situation, right? It's not an easy place to be. You're at sea. Or your foothold is weak, but you're able to find an encampment. And that's what the Hashmonaim managed to do. They managed to find themselves an encampment, a light within the darkness. Not that the whole world is now becoming well lit. It's still a darkened world, but we find this element of light within the world. And like the Rambam says, they were able to bring back the kingship, the Malchus, into 𝗵𝗆 Israel for a couple of 100 years. Wasn't great. We shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking this was an idyllic time.
Did it become a Jewish state after the victory? In other words, similar to what we have now, where the foreign ruling body were no longer there and we had sovereignty. Was it like that?
So yes, it was like that. We did have sovereignty. It just wasn't a very ideal sovereignty, a bit like what we've got now. They had sovereignty, but it wasn't the Davidic dynasty. It was the Hashmonaim who were Kohanim. And because they were Kohanim, so some of Rabbi Seinu, the Ramban, for example, really criticizes the Hashmonaim quite vehemently. But the Rambam says, despite that, it was still a sovereignty. Chazra Malchus Yisrael, meaning we shouldn't, we shouldn't belittle. Shouldn't downplay. We shouldn't belittle what they had, even though it wasn't the ideal. Far from it, and it was really tainted. It was beleaguered by a lot of infighting and struggling over who gets to be king and who gets to rule.
Sounds quite similar.
And yeah, exactly. So it was beleaguered by a lot of those kind of struggles, and so it wasn't fun, but it was sovereignty. And yeah, I think there is a, there's a good similarity. Please God. I mean, again, if you think about dimensions, what we've got now is much more than what they had then.
Of course, stronger and something that is, it would appear, much more stable,
much bigger in terms of numbers.
Where we stand on the world stage.
Yeah, absolutely. Influence. Different in those senses. But yeah, so in terms of sovereignty, yes, they were able to restore Jewish sovereignty until the destruction of 𝗵𝗴𝗵𝗵, which was, good 200-300 years later.
A lot of this conversation kind of swims around the idea of Jewish pride. Chanukah brings that out. There are a lot of people in our day that, for all the reasons that we've touched upon, and I'm not just talking about in the religious world, I'm talking about in generally across the Jewish world, Jewish people, that are a bit nervous of over-showing their Jewishness. This has been something growing up in England, to a certain extent, I would say, in my family, because it wasn't Jewish pride wasn't, it was there, but it wasn't like what I am now. But it was like, that whole name changing thing. I mean, my name,
having two names.
Well, my name, Goodwin, we were Goldstein. Again, I'm not making a criticism on my grandfather. I'm not. I'm just saying we had to fit in. Okay, there's all these stories of fitting in. But what would you say to someone who, watching this, if they're still tuned in, they're still enjoying what we're talking about, what would you say to them in terms of Chanukah and Jewish pride that would inspire and encourage them to say, hey, listen, take note in this and take it on board?
First of all, good question to finish with. And I'm just trying to think where to approach this from. Let me give you the following angle, okay? Takes us a bit away from Chanukah at the beginning, but we'll come back to Chanukah soon. So I want to take us back to 1991, I think it was, when the Berlin Wall fell.
Right.
You remember that?
Vaguely, I was 14.
14, all right. So I was just a bit older, and I remember it very strongly.
Right.
Meaning this was
a big deal.
This was a
I remember
big
it was a
deal.
big deal, yeah.
It was, this was world-changing in every possible sense. And I'm sure you remember the song, The Winds of Change.
Yep.
So, when all the world was singing about the wind of change that was happening in the crumbling of the USSR and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and wow, just thinking back, what heady days those were. It's just incredible to think back. But there was actually perhaps the deepest of changes that was taking place was something that nobody's written a song about yet. And that was, to a large degree, the end of Gollus, the end of Galut, as we've generally understood it.
Exile.
End of exile as we've generally understood it. Because the way that we've understood exile over the years is that being under foreign domination that doesn't allow you to keep the mitzvot as you would like to in their fullest sense, and of course prevents you from the final mission of going to Eretz Israel, going to the Holy Land, and serving God here, where we should be.
And it silenced the Jewish voice within you.
Absolutely, it really incapacitates you. It puts you on the constant defensive and so on, and justifiably so.
And are you referencing the USSR as the most extreme of this because it was?
I'm referencing the USSR as the last bastion of what Galut really was.
I understand.
Right, USSR, where people were unable to practice Judaism properly and were unable to leave and to make aliyah to...
Trapped in every sense.
Israel, absolutely. But when that fell, so there's virtually no place in the world today that Jews are not free to exercise their religion, free to project their voice in relative safety. I'm not saying there's no anti-Semitism anywhere in the world. There obviously is, and we still need to be very aware of it, and we need to be cautious of it. But it's a different world. It's a world in which we've got our own homeland that every Jew is welcome. We can come here. Ideal? No. There's a long way to go.
Opportunity? Absolutely.
Nobody should quote me and say, we've
arrived, we're
Pfeffer
here.
says we're final redemption. I say, no, there's a long way to go. But, think of where we are now. Think of the opportunities. Those opportunities are, and this is the main point here, they're only opportunities. If we don't make the most of them, if we don't take them into our hands and to project that voice, we just lost Rabbi Sachs.
I was about to say.
Rabbi Sachs projected that voice in his own context. He was in England. He definitely felt that the yoke of that galut, of being in that, British exile, whatever it was, but it didn't prevent him. He understood that we're in an era where we can project a voice, where Judaism can be a force of morality, a force of goodness, a source of light.
Family values.
The works, both within, obviously, the Jewish fold, but even beyond that.
Yeah.
And it's a mindset. And that is exactly the Chanukah mindset. It's about making sure that the Jewish home preserves its integrity, preserves what it stands for, but also projecting the light outwards from that Jewish home and beyond. And yes, there have been troubling times where we haven't been able to do that. And then you light your candles at home, on your living room table, like the Gemara says, 𝗷𝗵𝗴𝗵𝗁, and that's it. And that's sufficient.
Because you've got to live.
You've got to live, and you preserve the tradition in a way that on a what we would call on a low flame.
Right. Nice.
Literally.
Literally.
Literally
nice.
on a low flame. But now we're at a time where there isn't anywhere in the world where you can't light those lights. In New York they do it in Times Square. You don't have to go overboard, but you can definitely do it at the door, at the gateway, at your windows, to project to the world, both in a literal sense on Chanukah, but in a metaphorical sense in terms of the internal motion of the Jewish people today. We're not in the USSR anymore. Thank God, that's behind us.
Right.
Thank God. And we're in a position where we can express what we stand for. And you know what? I also think that the world is thirsty for this. The world is looking for values. The world is so beset, it's so filled with that there's no way to describe it, with emptiness, with vulgarity, with, yes, we are in a culturally, in a cultural vacuum, in a culturally, difficult place, Spurs aside, but it's not an easy place to be there. And the world is thirsty for what we can give, for what we can project. And I think, Rabbi Sachs was one person. Just look at what you did.
Yeah, I know. And it doesn't have to, and it doesn't have to be, like we spoke about off air before we started, it doesn't have to be in an overbearing religious sense. You didn't look at Rabbi Sachs. He was a rabbi, but never did you feel it was a religious exercise that he was whenever he was speaking. You were looking at a man who happened to wear a kippah, but I felt like that kippah represented and symbolized who and where he was projecting from. But he was, normal, have a laugh.
Well, he also didn't come over as being pretentious and
never.
Overbearing.
Never.
He was a very modest person. But again, Rabbi Sachs is only one version of this.
Right.
That's not the David Goodwin version.
You're right. And the Dayan Pfeffer version.
Absolutely. Each one's got a different version.
Right.
But it's a mindset. It's an internal motion. It's about how do you perceive yourself. And I think that, like you said, our generation has a different self-perception to that of our own fathers, certainly our grandfathers.
Right.
But, things are moving so fast that, yes, perceptions are changing. And this internal motion, the way in which we perceive what is it that we can do, what is it that we can bring to the world, I think Chanukah has a lot to teach us about that. And perhaps the fact that, but it wasn't always this way. Chanukah wasn't always such a universal and popular and defining festival.
Right.
Pesach, 𝗍𝗵 Seder, I think that was far more defining.
Right.
Still today, obviously, 𝗍𝗵 Seder can't belittle 𝗍𝗵 Seder.
No.
But nevertheless, Chanukah as a time where we take that light and we shine it outwards towards the entire world. That's something which, has become, as we can see, so culturally dominant, both within the Jewish people and outside of it, I think it teaches us a very central lesson.
It's something you said about the world is thirsty. Again, about wearing spectacles. If you want to see that things are positive and moving. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. When you arrived, I said to you, listening to Talk Sport, as I do, driving around streets of Jerusalem, which is always a bizarre experience, listening to sports radio coming from London. And I love it. I've got to be honest with you, I love it. Number one, the NHS, there are so many adverts about protecting yourself in the corona time, about are you a man that's had coronavirus? If you are, please go and donate because other people may need your plasma. Another thing that's happening in the sport, they're taking the knee. Everyone takes a knee at the moment before the whistle is blown for the beginning of the game. Now, you can look at the whole Black Lives Matter thing and the whole thing with tremendous skepticism, but at the end of the day, what it's produced is this idea that now the football fraternity, which is very big and very powerful influence upon people, have said, you know what? We are going to take on this idea of racism and to try our hand to stamp it out. Every day almost on TalkSport, they're talking about getting rid of racism. Racism has got to stop within football. These are massively important values in society. Agree with it, don't agree with it. This whole idea of the rainbow laces community and the gay community having an influence. Okay, for me it says tolerance. I may not agree with it all, but I do agree with the idea of tolerance. I'm just saying that it's seeping through in the value system. So when you say something like people out there are thirsty for it, yes, the world can be a very dark place, but I see the efforts that are being made in a non-religious sense that for me speak volumes of what the Jewish people are trying to project on the world, which is to make the world a better place. No one likes to be held down. No one. I don't know, as I've said before, I don't know what it's like to be a gay man. I have no idea. Must be really difficult as well, must be, or whatever a person is experiencing. But what I can be, as long as there's no harm coming my way, that's my red line, I can be tolerant. Rabbi Sachs, I remember he spoke about his conversations that he had with that community. He said it was a very moving experience. You're dealing with people that are probably struggling with a pain that you and I have got no idea about. So the least I can be is tolerant, even if I don't understand it all or condone it all from a religious sense. That's a different conversation. But I can at least have the attitude. And the same with racism. Where is there a need to hate another person just because they're black? It doesn't compute with my brain that's a problem. So when I see the Premier League and the football fraternity making an effort and it's spoken about, it must be a good thing. It must be a good thing for society, tolerance and acceptance of people. So I just see all that kind of wrapped up in a subtle way, like you said at the beginning. Hashem works in very mysterious ways.
Right, and getting into all of the issue that you mentioned right now is probably a bit beyond the scope,
of course,
of our conversation right now. But I will say though, just to continue what you're saying and to present another angle of it, is that when we see all of the kind of discontent that's going around, obviously there's never been a society that's had more plenty on the one hand,
right,
that's had more affluence, that's had better infrastructures, that's had more going for it than our society of the 21st century. We've reached a level that the King Louis XIV wouldn't have had food that's anywhere near as good as the poorest person in Western society.
Right.
It's really probably. I mean, maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but almost true. Almost true. And you think of the place where we've come in a material sense, and yet at the same time you look at the discontent. And like you said when we were speaking a bit before we started, the amount of emotional disturbances, mental illness,
mental health, that's right.
Mental health that's going on. You look at the, like you mentioned, you look at Black Lives Matter, which isn't just, it is certainly an expression of the problems, the ills of American, in this case, society vis-a-vis racism, but it also expresses a lack of self-belief, a lack of belief in what America actually represents. Right. Taking the knee is a real statement. It's a statement that 1 second, do we believe in ourselves? Do we believe in our founding principles? Where are we going? And I think that there's a real vacuum for so many people, and it's just an opening. And that opening is there. The question is, what do you do with it? And
that's the thirst that you were referring to, where we can step in.
Yeah. Same thing for corona. Coronavirus, it's an opening. It's a spring. That spring, it can spring back in no time, and then things will just go back to how they were. The opening is there for us, for human agency, to make something of it. The if you don't light the light, it doesn't come by itself. God's not going to do it for us, right? That's what Chanukah teaches us, that it's up to us. Our homes are there. Our Judaism, right? Internally, we're strong, we're good. We have our challenges, but we're there. It's about giving it over. It's about making the point, making the case, articulating the argument, spreading that light out. And that's the mindset.
I'm going to ask you one more thing. We don't have to dwell on it too long. Is darkness the absence of light, or is darkness something that Hashem created in of itself?
Well, I mean, again, if you look up the physics textbook, then you'll see that darkness is the absence of light. But certainly in the Kabbalistic tradition, so darkness is considered to be, there's a force. There's a force of darkness. You can call it a force of light removal, of creating that absence of light. There's even an expression which is called 𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵𝗵. It's an Aramaic expression. It means a dark light. It's very obviously
interesting.
A bit of an oxymoron. But it's a light that, as it were, it
emits not goodness.
It shines a force of darkness. It shines forth a force of darkness.
Where the word light there is a verb. It's
exactly
an active,
exactly.
Right.
And certainly in the context of Chanukah, so that is exactly what the struggle of Chanukah was about. It's about, do we bring in the light of God into the world, or do we, as it were, eject? Do we remove the light of God from the world? And that is a question that, that is a struggle that continues very, very much till this very day. Do we bring in that light, or do we, 𝗔𝗆 v'shalom, do things that cause that light to go in? And I think it's something that, we need to ask ourselves now and again, about our own lives, our own trajectory.
What are we doing?
What are we doing? Is this something which is bringing in the light, or is it something that is, God forbid, removing or reducing that light? And it's that's a serious question.
Also, how we go about doing it. It's not just the doing, like the goal. It's also how you go about it. Sometimes people can have the most amazing intentions, but sometimes the pathway to disaster is paved with good intentions. So you've got to also just be aware of what's going on around you, and it's a thing. It's a way.
Absolutely. If we would start giving examples, we would never stop.
No, exactly.
But absolutely true. And again, when we make mistakes, by the way, and that's fine.
And it's corrective. It's
every path
exactly 100%.
Must be riddled with peaks and with troughs, because if you don't make those mistakes, you don't grow.
It's not human.
It's not human, absolutely. A human path is a path that's not linear, doesn't go straight.
Right.
You look at any graph of any human behavior, and it will never, ever be a linear straight path. It will always be jagged. It will always be ups and downs. But it's about the trajectory. It's about where you're going. It's about the direction. And
are you coming from that flame? Yeah. Doesn't matter what's going to be along the way. That light, that analogy of light.
That light. Are you passing on the torch? Are you projecting that light? Are you doing everything that you can everything that you can is a bit much, but are you doing, a lot of the things you can
in my business in filmmaking, light is incredibly central. We don't see each other here in this studio without my angling and my setting up of the lights in the right way. And also we sometimes, to get a certain emotional effect on screen, we have to deflect or reflect light in a certain way. We have to bounce light. We have to remove light sometimes to have a light on it. It's very deep. Filmmaking is very deep in this sense, and photography.
It's good. It's wonderful to have such an appreciation of light, because light is the most spiritual element that we have in the world. And it's not for nothing that light represents this concept of godliness in the world, that represents this bringing in divine goodness, which is what we're here for.
Chanukah Sameach.
Chanukah Sameach, David. Thanks for the privilege and the opportunity.
Awesome
Always
stuff.
A great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, and have a wonderful festival of light, and may we just see it be more revealed in all the things that we do, and the rest of the people, the rest of the world.
Amen to that.
Thank you. All the best. Have a great day.